Welcome back to the Rewild Yourself Champions Conversations. Rewild Yourself is a global initiative by the Voice for Nature Foundation that focuses on creating opportunities for individuals and communities to connect with nature and wild places, uniting both humanity and nature's well-being. Our champions form a selected group of inspiring people from all over the world doing great things for nature. Hit subscribe to learn, be inspired, and hear what stories they have to tell. Today we're diving into Bryony's world. Bryony is an interdisciplinary artist with a background working in social history museums and contemporary science research institutes. Her creative practice focuses on understanding the self as nature, belonging to it, and shifting the power dynamics of how we culturally perceive human-nature relationships. We were lucky enough to spend some time with Bryony recently to learn more about her current projects and the messages behind them. What living thing do you feel close affinity with?
Which living thing best represents me? I keep wanting to come back to the leaf sheep sea slug. Not that I've ever met one, but I just love that they're out there doing their thing, being funky, and are small but mighty in color. And I feel like I bring a lot of color into my artworks. So all of those kind of, but I think maybe if I'm going for plants, I'd say moss as a kind of representative of my engagement with the world. Slow, steady, but absorbing and amassing ideas, inspirations, and growing, but kind of to the contours of whatever the moss is growing on. Yeah.
What is the more than human artist that you admire the most?
Off the top of my head, I probably would say the sky, as a constantly changing palette of colors and shapes and moods, and how it sets the tone. I'm just looking right now out to blue sky with white clouds, and just like how that can so quickly change to like steel gray and kind of create this kind of like oppressive drama, or blankets of rain and the lightning and the sunsets, whether you've got the most incredible hues of pinks and purples.
Tell us about your background in art and how you complemented it with science.
So my background is very much working in the arts. I was raised by a mother who was a community artist, and taught art, and was an art psychotherapist as well. So I was, that part of me was nurtured, and I went to art school, did a degree in fine art painting. Science for me was not a comfort zone. I struggled with all of the sciences at school. And I found that the educational system at that time, it was, maybe it's like this still, but I think it's getting better. It felt very much like there was these academic kind of targets that we had to meet. And if we approached the questions that science raises in ways that didn't conform to that, then we were kind of deemed as just not having any kind of affinity with the subject. And I felt quite discouraged at school to continue, even though I loved biology and physics, chemistry less so. So I definitely left school with a sense of the sciences are not for me, but the arts are. After graduating from my art degree, I decided to move more into museology, so museums, largely because the contemporary, like the commercial art world, felt really cutthroat and quite, super competitive. And it just didn't gel with where I was at that time. And the museums sector was really focusing on diversity and inclusion and wanting to tell multiple stories and approach cultural heritage from many different directions. And I was really inspired and encouraged by that. And so I went into that field and I worked in museums, social history museums mostly, for about 10 years, and kind of put my art practice, as a kind of back burner, something to return to later maybe, but really dove into like curating exhibitions and working with community groups and academics who are specialists in all these different social history stories. I then went to work as the public engagement manager for exhibitions for the UK's largest scientific research lab, called the Francis Crick Institute. So that opened in 2016, and I spent 4 years working there in this huge building with this public exhibition space that was filled with 1,200 scientists. So for someone that felt really like science is not for me, and kind of quite intimidated by science, that was a real learning curve. But it was fascinating, and these scientists, were studying things like cancer and tuberculosis and HIV and the COVID pandemic, the vaccines development. They were part of that movement as well, and some of them were Nobel Prize winning scientists from all over the world. So and studying the human body on this microscopic level, molecules and cells, etc. Right down to the minutiae. So for me, that was the moment where my artist self, my inner artist, started to get really inspired and excited by the world of science, and could see a way, through the way that I was creating exhibitions and inviting other artists and designers in to create exhibitions inspired by their research, this way that these two different disciplines could work together, talk about the same subject in different ways, approach them in different ways, but collaborate together in a way that could invite the wider public to understand the research questions and the findings in ways that took us beyond traditional scientific kind of comms and public engagement.
What was your approach to help bridge art and science?
What really struck me, the Francis Crick Institute was a discovery research, is a discovery research center. And what really struck me, what I was trying to do, was get to the humans behind the research and connect with them on their curiosity about the world. And that is really what drives them to study the same molecule for like 40, 50 years, real passion and curiosity about how on earth human bodies are made and develop and get sick, and it's just that passion is a place of meeting, I think, between the artists and the scientists. And so I really learned there how to kind of nurture that, and then to see where we can take the stories.
Tell us about a pivotal moment in your early career as an artist.
At the Crick, I got to work a lot with the microscopy team there, and was just really drawn in by the beauty of the human body at the microscopic scale. And simultaneously, outside of working at the Crick, I was also getting more engaged with the climate crisis and thinking about like, what can I do that's meaningful? Feeling quite what's the word? Kind of there was an activation in me like that I hadn't quite found an outlet yet, for a way to express my feelings about where humanity was going. And so that time with the microscopy team really coincided with me kind of returning to my art practice, and I started painting, and I started talking to a few people about murals and street art. And a friend of mine had a wall in South London that she was hoping to get painted. And so there was just this kind of like I mean, I could try and paint on your wall. Like, I've never done anything that big, but like, maybe. And so we started talking.
What made this experience so special for you?
There were these themes that she'd given me that she was really interested in the mural kind of um, containing. I was being really drawn to botanical paintings at that time, but really macro, really zoomed in to look at the minutiae and the beauty of the detail, which was really inspired by the microscopy that I was seeing in my day job. And so, to cut a long story short, but eventually, like, I think this was 2019, maybe 2018, I painted this giant mural on the side of her house. And it was a lot of fun, really hard work. I learned a lot, but I think it was a pivotal moment for me, not only because I was reconnecting with my own art practice and finding joy in that, and it had this environmental message as well as those personal messages for my friend, but it was also the impact of my visibility in that community, in that the conversations that I was able to have. I was there for like 2 weeks painting every single day. So I got to know all of her neighbors. And we made this short film with all of their kind of reflections and captured some of the conversations that we were having. And it was just really um, rich and heartwarming and super um, encouraging. Everyone was saying like, this area of London's calling out for color and we need more, nature in our lives, and, loads of conversations around that. But in particular, there were these three young girls who were black, and they visited me every single day. They were sisters, and there was something there. Their dad would bring them to visit me, and eventually they did a little bit of painting with me, but sometimes they just want to sit and watch. And there was just something there in that the kind of father was saying, this is showing them that they can do this too. They can do something big. They can be visible and take up space, and they can, paint, what speaks to them. And he was just kind of really reflecting to me about like the impact and the conversations that they were having as a family after visiting me. And I guess that really stayed with me, and led me in a kind of quite a particular route for a few years. Thinking about visibility of people of color, of women of color in the nature space, in the street art world, in the public art world as well.
Can you tell us how your practice transformed into a process of unlearning and remembering?
Working as an artist now for 7 years after that kind of gap of working in museums. And I think at the beginning of this later return, I was very much still trying to kind of conform to dominant understandings of how we represent or talk about the nature crisis in the public space, which is still, largely from that kind of more scientific, rational angle. And it's so important, the data and the research that's taking place. But I think I was going through a process of unlearning, like in terms of maybe revisiting the hierarchies over a few years of kind of questioning how much that data and those messages that I was at the beginning kind of focusing on trying to communicate actually resonate with those that I'm interacting with my work, and how much do they feel like they're talking down to, or giving in a one directional way. So there was, having worked solidly in science for, well, about 6 years at that point, I think there was a a period of time where I was like, I love working with researchers, and I find their work and their practices and their questions fascinating, but there's something missing for me here, and searching for that. And whilst not wanting to cut those ties, kind of wanting to kind of open them a little bit, kind of unravel them a little bit and look a bit more closely and think about what for me would feel more authentic in terms of trying to start conversations with the public about our relationship to nature today.
Why remembering?
It was a big period of kind of rediscovering, re-meeting myself, and also reconnecting to, you know, my inner child, my childhood, kind of those foundational beginnings of like how I was taught as a young person to interact with the world in a way that was with humility and play and curiosity and magic and, you know, being excited about the unknown and, you know, those kind of things. So it took me a few years to get to a place where I was like, okay, this balance, there is a harmony that can happen here, and I can kind of see how I can integrate these different aspects and interests that feel more roomy to me. And, you know, I talk about a remembering as well as a kind of unraveling, because I was also going through a period of, I guess, reconnecting with my own ancestry and my familial links to different areas of the world, doing a lot of my own research into different folklores and practices, indigenous practices and knowledge. Stories. I think I was searching for stories that were part of my lineage and my inheritance, from my Caribbean roots as well as from my English roots. And so it was becoming more familiar and absorbing those, and kind of listening to the wisdom in those, and finding the patterns and the kind of repeated motifs and the different names for the same kind of human experience or human understandings in these from different parts of the world. So yeah, I think that's still an ongoing process of that's kind of like dance between unraveling and remembering, and then weaving, coming back to weave it together. Yeah.
How did you come about embodied ecology?
I came across the term embodied ecologies, and this was through a series of essays by anthropologists, led by Dr. Andrea Ford at the University of Edinburgh. And they were writing a lot about human health in the environment, but within this framework of embodied ecologies. And I think I was kind of trying to find a term to describe or a framework for my practice to kind of be able to help people kind of get a hook on what it is that I'm interested in.
How and why did you apply embodied ecology to your creative practice?
We're inseparable from our environments. So, you know, they were talking a lot about the ways in which we are absorbing the different chemicals and nutrients and atmospheric, you know, particles of the environment, and how that's shaping our bodily health. But for me, I've taken on the term embodied ecology, and I've started writing about it, exploring in my Substack, like, what does it mean as a creative practice? Because for two reasons. I think one, I'm really curious about how we can break down the sense of boundary between human and nature, understand ourselves as nature, as part of it, and literally think about the different ways that we are moving through nature constantly, shaping it and being shaped by it, emotionally and physically. And my practice has really kind of lent into that over the last few years. but then also, I guess it's pushing the understanding of ourselves as nature further to think about life cycles and the fact that we are returning to nature at some point. So I talk quite a lot about humans as humus, the original word for human. And, there is this interest for me in looking directly at the reality of, at some point, our bodies are returned, and there's no escaping that. And there is this cycle of life that we are part of. So we were temporarily animated now, as this entity. But I guess, so I'm always kind of trying to think about different ways of how we are part of nature, we exist in nature, we belong in nature, but we also belong to nature. And it kind of like, I quite like challenging the hierarchies of who's really in control here.
Tell us about your latest art piece and what led you to it.
I'm just back now from having delivered a really big project in London with a group of environmental historians at the University of Liverpool, working on a project called Melting Metropolis. So this is a long-term 5-year research project looking at the phenomenon of urban heat islands in London, Paris, New York, and Port of Spain in Trinidad. And I'm the research artist with the project. I spent some time in New York last year with the environmental historians there, and ran workshops across the boroughs, drawing workshops, but very much kind of led by historical archives and research. But there was an autoethnography aspect to it, where I was really observing my own bodily responses to the extreme heat of the summer in New York, which is so humid. It's a very different. I mean, we're getting hotter here, definitely. We're in a heat wave in Europe, but it was nothing like I'd ever experienced. So I came back to the UK late last year and created a sculpture, really largely inspired by New York, but also the other research that's taking place in the other 3 cities, which is currently on exhibition in Orleans House Gallery in Twickenham in South London until the 31st of August. And the sculpture is called My Body is a Sundial. And it was my first kind of offering of some of the noticings that came to me whilst I was there in that extreme heat, of how my body is buckling under this heat, and those moments of actually not being sure whether I can trust my body to withstand this heat. It was quite a shocking experience for me to feel that frailty. The sculpture is kind of, in an abstract way, representing some of those physical responses to that heat, but also the emotional responses and this sense of anger, rage, powerlessness, sorrow, how far we've strayed from our relationship to the sun. Memories, it captures memories as well of summers in the past. So that kind of innocence of my childhood in the 80s, when, being outside was a place of safety and joy in the summer. The sun was something to look forward to, not to hide from, in air-conditioned buildings.
What or who inspired the idea of the body as a sundial?
I worked with sundial experts, and they really inspired me to think about the body as a sundial, because with a lot of exercises that they do with schools is to kind of show children how their shadow can help them tell the time. And one of the sundial experts started to talk to me about how, yes, sundials can record solar time, but they can also, this new innovations showing how to use sundials to record solar intensity. So my body as a sundial is a painted sculpture that allows the sunlight to come through and cast shadows and colors, and that changes throughout the day, and visitors move through it and their reflections alter the paintings. So it does kind of capture the change of time, but it is also a record of solar intensity. And it was really me kind of starting to think about the body as a record or as an archive of all of these different experiences.
Tell us about the Stand of the Sun event.
I invited a group of creatives working in different disciplines to help me expand upon those stories and those questions through a performance that we delivered around solstice called Stand of the Sun. And this was a kind of conversation between the sculpture, which is very much about one person's bodily experience in relationship to the sun. And Stand of the Sun was an imaginary kind of conversation with the sun, thinking about the urban heat island, the experience of our cities from the perspective of our closest star. So in Stand of the Sun, you hear from the hot heart of our solar system as it moves through space into our world, travels through our cities, meets our bodies, moves through our bodies, and reflects on the changes in the geometries, the materials, the responses, the relationship. I guess what I was trying to do was kind of stretch and exercise our empathy muscle. Like, can we have empathy for an entity that's so different to us? Can we possibly enter into imagination exercise where we consider ourselves from a very different perspective, and witness what we're doing to ourselves and one another from this greater distance and this deeper time perspective, with compassion, but like searing honesty as well. So it was a performance with dancers and musicians around and within the sculpture. And it was a call and response, really.
What were some of the main takeaways from the event?
It was really special for me that the researchers, as part of Melting Metropolis, there's 14 of them. They each reflected back to me that it illuminated their own practice in new ways and kind of deepened their understanding of it and gave it this kind of macro view, and that it was deeply moving to see it portrayed in such a multidisciplinary way, and in we did call it a ritual. It was quite a sacred experience. So it did take them out of their comfort zone, but I think they found that experience really rich, which is great. And for me personally, I mean, it was spine tingling to kind of carry this idea and this story into a creative space where I knew that the artists all was super experienced and had great integrity and really believed in the research and the purpose of the project. So they carried it in ways that I could never have done, with real grace and beauty and intention. And so I am absolutely like wanting to continue this kind of practice, working, in the studio on my own research and development, but then having these opportunities to take it into spaces to work in an interdisciplinary way, for live experiences that are outside and that are free and accessible to the public, grounded in research, but where can we take it?
What action do you think needs to be taken to address our current relationship with the sun?
The ways in which we are building our cities and designing our neighborhoods, the materials that we're using. And this is, a lot of this is like governmental kind of responsibilities, but there are some things that we can still do as individuals. But it's holding the sun's heat too close, and we have not evolved to withstand that. So really paying attention to the geometries of our cities and the materials that we're using, and the shade, the access to shade and cooling water and breeze, being able to move through these cities. Like, how can we start to open them? What decisions can we make as communities or as voters to demand this natural release that should be happening every night, right? Like, the cities are just holding it. The other aspects, like really kind of recognizing those qualities of human nature that have led us to this sense of, or this lack of humility in place of our closest star, and this sense that humanity can control nature. So questioning that. So I'm really interested in like Jungian theory about shadow work. So that kind of came in. But I think the other kind of key message was community. Like, from the solar perspective, the piece kind of ends with, the Earth is turning on its axis, and it's a witness to all of the incredible number of activists and activist communities that exist, that are working together. And it's, the systems that we are living at the moment are doing their best to tell us that we are alone, that we are in the minority. And, I think there's a lot of interesting research in Melting Metropolis about actually the real sheer number and strength and power of the grassroots work that's taking place in these cities. And so it's really about connecting and finding community and sharing your experiences.
What is wild drawing?
Wild drawing is a practice I developed during the pandemic, on those daily permitted walks. Went out with my sketchbook and my pencil. I think what it is a really experimental, kind of messy, playful drawing exercise, mark making, that is based on noticing the wider natural world and your or my interaction with it. So it's not about creating beautiful studies of a landscape. It's really about, sometimes I'm drawing with breath, sometimes I'm drawing with sound, touch, texture, sometimes with my eyes, but it's really about tuning into the different kind of elements of the environment, the dynamism of it. So noticing how different species are moving through it, how the wind is moving through it, the different points of heat, the different textures. It's trying to be as much of a sponge as possible in the space. And the mark making is just really a kind of a channel for that noticing. Like, it's not, I don't really care what the drawing looks like at the end. It's about me making a mark as an acknowledgement of a noticing, a bodily noticing of where I'm at.
Can you give us an example?
So one example is birdsong. Like, one of my favorite practices is closing my eyes, and every time, it doesn't even need to be birdsong, but like, it can be any sound around me, but choose birds. Like, every time I hear a particular sound on the page with my eyes closed, I'm making a mark, and the mark is in some abstract way a representation of that bird, but it's me having noticed that, and it's the way that I place it on the page is in its orientation to me, so I know that that was, on my right or in the west, or that kind of, and building a kind of a soundscape through the marks around me. And it's about kind of decentralizing the ego a bit. So kind of the more that I do it, the more I feel like my awareness expanding outwards and outwards, and I hear softer and fainter sounds, and I can hear like replies, and it's just like gets me to a place of feeling like I'm just part of something so much bigger than whatever it is I came into the woods with my own little human, you know, thinkings. It's like, oh, there's conversations happening all around me.
What do you need to start wild drawing?
The nature of wild drawing is go out with whatever you have. Like sometimes I'm going out with a biro, sometimes I'm going out with a whole set of pencils, sometimes even inks. But it's just, and it could be a scrap piece of paper or a beautiful sketchbook or whatever. But like, it's not really about what it looks like. It's about the action. So I don't have a favorite medium for wild drawing other than the one that's in my pocket. Like,
What is next for the studio?
I'm going to be continuing with the embodied ecology Substack. So that's where I'm sharing musings and findings and experimentations in the studio as I continue to consider what on earth embodied ecology is as a creative practice. We will be screening the Stand of the Sun film. So I will be sharing dates and locations for that. And then really this experience of creative writing and working in installations and then inviting in other creative practitioners to develop some kind of immersive performance storytelling experience outside is where I'm going to be pouring my energy. And I think there's a lot of other stories that I've been working on. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time in the studio evolving those. And if anyone's like Cornwall based, there'll be open studios occasionally as well coming up. So chance to come and look around, poke around and see what I've been up to.
What are your fears and hopes for the natural world?
I think my greatest fear for the natural world is that humanity will miss this tiny window of opportunity to change course and act in from a place of reciprocity and humility and kinship. But therein also lies my hope. There is still a window, there is still a chance, and I do believe in humans. I do love humans, even though as much as I despair occasionally, more frequently at the moment, of some of our choices, there are just so many incredible communities and movements that give me hope. So it's that they're in the same place of just, we've got this window.
What is your happy place in nature?
I think my happy place in nature, it changes depending on where I'm at, but like wherever I can see nature just bobbing along, doing its own thing, thriving. I mentioned just before we started the interview, just yesterday I got to go on a snorkeling kind of trip around the coast of Cornwall here, and just like being able to just see the majesty of all these different beings kind of living, doing their own thing and not really kind of concerned with what these random humans were thinking or doing. And that was a happy place. That was a real honor and very humbling and very inspiring, just to kind of see that ecosystem that seemed to be thriving in that part of the coastline. Yeah, that gives me joy.
Bryony, thank you so much for using your talent to make nature research more accessible for all and inspiring us to be more playful and colorful. To learn more about Bryony's work, visit the link down below. Thanks for tuning in to Rewild Yourselves in Conversation series. To learn more about the inspiring Rewild Yourself champions and for more ways to find your wild, visit rewildyourself.com or join the conversation on Instagram at rewildyourself.